But what I heard that day was this, what we call the three C's, that I didn't cause it, that I couldn't cure it, and that I couldn't control it. And somehow in that moment, I felt this huge weight coming off of me. I felt lighter. But then my next thought was, yeah, but I'm still miserable. What can I do for me? Because if I can't do anything for her and I'm miserable, then maybe there's something I can do for me.
Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. If you're tired of feeling fragmented and overwhelmed, this podcast is your guide to creating a life of wholeness, authenticity, and healthy boundaries. I'm a woman in recovery who is also a boundaries coach and speaker. I share raw and honest insights from my own journey and the principles of 12-Step Recovery. Discover how to set boundaries without guilt or shame, overcome people-pleasing tendencies, manage your emotions effectively, cultivate a stronger sense of self, and build healthier relationships. My approach is raw, honest, and sometimes a little bit, a lot sweary. I'm an avid beachcomber and a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially Christmas movies. I wear fingerless gloves almost all year round because my hands are always cold. And I love taking pictures of license plates with my initials BN on them. I don't speak for or endorse any particular 12-step program of recovery. Though I'm a huge fan of 12-step recovery and a member of two such fellowships, I cannot speak for them. If you're ready for real talk and practical tools for transformation, keep listening. This is episode 340 with guest Spencer T. And its title is When Life Gets Lifey. I am really excited today to be able to hear the experience, strength, and hope of Spencer. I met him because a couple of colleagues and fellow travelers in recovery referred me to his podcast a few years ago, initially to be a guest on it. And I haven't listened to every episode by any means, but I've listened to a lot of episodes and I love his style and I love his show. And I can't wait to hear his story. Of course, I've heard bits and pieces here and there. And I was recently a guest on his podcast, and I was like, wait a minute, I need to have you on my podcast. So I'm really excited to hear from Spencer, who, by the way, I didn't say the name of his podcast. It's called The Recovery Show. It's the one that has the Luna moth as the emblem. And I'm really excited to hear his story. So take it away, Spencer.
Okay. And just to, set expectations or not set expectations, uh, I'm not sure what the relative timing of you being on my show and me being on your show is going to be.
That's true. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Although you're the next, well, you can cut this out, but there's like one more between the one I just published and you. So
Okay.
if I stay on track, then you'll be out on mine before I'm on yours. So anyway. Okay, hi. My name is Spencer, and I am a grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon and Alateen. Want to, as we say, qualify myself briefly. I I identify, I think, three qualifications for being an Al-Anon, and I'm going to take them in some random order, not necessarily most important first. I grew up in a household with, as far as I know, normal drinking. I discovered much later in life that my mother's brother self-identified as an alcoholic and eventually found recovery. His son also self-identified as an alcoholic and later found recovery. So there's, in my mind, that tells me there's some alcoholism in that branch of the family. And I don't know how far back it goes, but what I do know is that I learned a whole bunch of adult-child coping skills as a child from my mother. So she learned them somewhere, and I can't really speculate about that. And everybody who might be able to answer that question is now dead. So I got that. And then I eventually married woman who is also self-identified as an alcoholic in recovery, although she was not in recovery at the time. And she has given me permission to talk about my experience with her. So, as far as the anonymity thing goes, I'm covered there, I think.
Mm.
It was the effects of her alcoholic drinking and behavior on me that eventually brought me to Al-Anon. And
Mhm.
I've heard so many people in the room say, I should have come so much earlier. I had been in a relationship with this person for 22 years, married for 18. The alcoholism developed slowly, and so when it finally got to the point where I was noticing, hey, this isn't normal, it was kind of normal, if you know what I mean.
For sure.
Used to it, right? Eventually, I hit a bottom. It was sort of a bottom and a top at the same time. I was at a recovery center for friends and family, and they were telling us all about alcoholism and this and that and the other thing. And I'd heard a lot of this before because it wasn't the first time that she had tried rehab. But what I heard that day was this, what we call the three C's, that I didn't cause it, that I couldn't cure it, and that I couldn't control it. And somehow in that moment, I felt this huge weight coming off of me. I felt lighter.
Mhm.
But then my next thought was, yeah, but I'm still miserable. What can I do for me? Because if I can't do anything for her and I'm miserable,
Mhm.
then maybe there's something I can do for me. And I had heard about Al-Anon, and I kept saying, I don't need any 12-step program. She's the one who needs the 12-step program. I'm sure you've heard that before many times. But that day, something changed for me. I was driving home from the hospital, and I called a friend who I knew was in AA. And I said to him, hey, do you know anything about Al-Anon? And he said, yeah. I said, there's a really good meeting. It's right around the corner from me. It's tonight. If you'd like, I could take and introduce you to some people.
Mm.
And I, of course, said, well, I'll have to think about that. Like I was taking the step, but I wasn't taking the step.
Right. Yeah.
I thought about it for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and I called him back and said, yes, please. And that was my first Al-Anon meeting that night. And at the end of that hour, the thing that I knew was I was no longer alone,
Yeah.
because this disease had so isolated me. I did not feel like I could talk about it to anybody, not
Mhm.
family, not friends, nobody. And here was a room full of people that actually understood what was going on.
Mm.
The third thing that I identify as qualifying me for Al-Anon, and this is probably the real one, is me.
Mm.
And I say that because when I look back at my life, I spent years trying to help people,
Mhm.
trying to fix people, trying to control other people without, as you might imagine, very much success. And so I see that it was that in me that, sure, it was enabled by, learning good codependent behaviors as a child, but that in me then brought me to choose.
Mhm.
And when I look at the people that I chose to have relationships with, almost every single one of them, quote, needed my help in some way. Um, so I figure it took me about 40 something years, depending when you count the onset of consciousness in a child. It took me 40 something years to get to Al-Anon. Figure it's going to take me another 40 something years at least to, work through all those things that I have to unlearn and learn new behaviors. I also like to say, if I go to the gym, I don't go to the gym once or twice and then say, oh, I got this gym thing.
Mhm.
I have to keep going. I have to keep practicing. I have to keep my exercise routine, and Al-Anon is part of my spiritual exercise. So I titled this one Life Gets Lifey because the alcoholic situation continued for a while. I started to recover in that situation while it was still active, while I was still active drinking. I started to recover myself. And she found long-term sobriety about 20 years ago. So why am I still in Al-Anon? Well, our 12th step and the 12th step and just about every 12-step program that I'm aware of, maybe all of them, says we tried to practice these principles in all our affairs. And what I have found is that the things that I have learned in Al-Anon, that I learned to deal with alcoholism and its effects on me, and as a reading that we talked about in a meeting last night said, and the effects that I had on other people as I was passing the effects of the disease on to them through myself, that those skills, those tools, those principles that I have learned and am learning have helped me in so many other places in my life. And I'm going to just sort of do some pick and choose here. I think the first one where it became really clear that something had changed for me and that I was able to use these tools in a situation that I had never encountered before and thought I didn't know what to do. My son was in college, and we got a phone call one evening that he was being committed or had been committed. I'm not now sure about the exact sequence to a psychiatric hospital in the locked ward because he had done some things that were construed as, could be taken as, maybe were threats to his own health or somebody else's. And, the police got called and so on and so forth. So he's in this psych hospital, 1,600 miles away from me. He's either 19 or 20 at this point. And he's been banned from school because of his actions. So he has no place to live. He has basically no money because he's a student, right? And they won't let him out except to, some responsible adult. Well, he's an adult, but, somebody who can be responsible for making sure that they're not letting him out onto the street, which I appreciated, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh man, inside everything's just, my stomach is churning. And I went to my home group meeting the evening before I was going to fly 1,600 miles to where he was. And I said, my son's in the psych hospital and I don't know what to do. I said, if he was in alcoholic rehab, I think I'd know what to do, but I don't know what to do. And that was how I honestly felt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I arrived, sprung him, as it were, I realized that I really did know what to do, which is I was there to provide support, not to fix his situation, not to try to control the people around him, but just to provide for him the things he could not provide for himself. And I've heard a definition of enabling as doing things for people that they can do for themselves, or getting between somebody and the consequences of their actions. And he had some consequences. Like I said, he was barred from school until he could convince them that it was going to be safe to let him back in. And that we had to do that at the police station. He had to do that at the police station. He invited me to come along, keep him company. But what I provided was housing, because he had nowhere to live, transportation, because he walked everywhere as a student on campus, and food, because he couldn't eat at the cafeteria in the dorm because he was banned from campus, right? What he had to do was get readmitted to school, which involved an interview at the police station. And while we were in that interview at the police station, a policeman in full regalia walked in and handed him a restraining order that his ex had filed on him as a no contact restraining order, which meant he really could not go back to the dorm because they lived in the same dorm. And it's really hard to have no contact when you're living in the same building. So now he has to find a new place to live. And he has to presumably figure out some mode of transportation from that new place to campus. I helped a little bit with that because I bought him a bicycle. But he had to do the rest of the footwork. He had to accept the restraining order. He had to get readmitted to school, which did happen. I had one, what I might call an Al-Anon relapse over the weekend because the counselor told us that we would hear by Friday, and we didn't hear by Friday. And so I think on Saturday, I called her office phone and left a message saying, "Hey, we didn't hear from you. What's going on?" Which presumably she ignored appropriately. So, and when he found a place to live with a friend of his, then I asked him, I said, "So this friend, he's your drug supplier, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'm not wild about this idea, but you're an adult. It's your decision." And it took him, I think, close to a year to realize that living with this guy was not good for him and to move out. And this has been a pattern with this son that he needs to learn things his own way.
Mm-hmm.
Lots. I won't go into to. Well, actually, we'll forward a little bit on the same kid. After graduating from college, he decides to go to grad school in philosophy, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. But he gets a full ride at the University of Connecticut, which involved teaching some sessions of like intro logic, but that's how you get paid as a grad student, right? And he decides he's going to save money by camping in the woods while he's going to grad school in Connecticut in the winter. You live in Connecticut in the
I
winter.
know, like not, yeah. We were just talking about not camping in the winter right before
Yeah,
we started recording.
you can see
Yeah,
why we felt this was not the best
yeah,
plan,
yeah.
but like I said, he has to learn things for himself. So I drove him up there and dropped him off at the curb with his bike and his backpack, not knowing where he was going to sleep that night. And I said, I don't know, good luck and I love you or something. And I drove away. And that was one of the hardest things I have ever done.
Mm,
But, I can't change him. It took him a couple weeks to realize that camping in the woods takes a lot of time and energy, and it was detracting from his actual ability to do grad school, and he found a place to live.
mhm,
You know, but again, my recovery principles and just understanding what is mine and what is not mine, and loving detachment. And that was loving detachment. I had to detach from what he was doing and my feelings about it, because dumping them on him would not have made the situation any better. Probably would have made it worse.
mhm,
Um, so, and I'd been in Al-Anon, what, a decade or something at that point. So I knew some stuff. I'd
mhm,
practiced some stuff. Um, the the other big area in which one of the main principles that I have used heavily is that of acceptance.
mm,
Um, and to me, acceptance is realizing, understanding, seeing that what is, is.
mm.
Okay. I might not like it. I might not want it to be that way, but it is, and I can't change it. Okay. And perfect example right now, we're recording this just after that big winter storm came through. I can't do anything about that. I can't make the snow not snow. I can't make the wind not blow. But I can accept that it's happening and make appropriate preparations. You know, when it was -10 the other day, I put on extra layers, and I put extra layers on my poor dog who has to go outside.
Mm.
I can stay inside, I'm retired. I don't have to go anywhere really. And, be prepared for the cold and also plan to not spend more time in it than I need to, right?
Mhm.
I love the weather as an example because I think just about everybody accepts you can't
Yeah.
change the weather, right?
Yeah. This is what's
Yeah,
happening. Yeah.
you have to roll with it.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be a, old man yells at clouds to quote that meme. And if you haven't seen it, I'm sure if you Google old man yells at clouds, you'll find it. And I'm an old man, but I don't yell at the clouds. So where this became absolutely critical and where I got to sort of re-practice everything that I learned about living with alcoholism was when my parents started developing dementia. And this same year, this same trip where I drove my son to Yukon, I'm driving back, and one of the routes to Yukon goes right past my parents' house, about halfway. So I'm driving back from Yukon, and I had sort of consciously, not consciously, not gone to visit my parents that summer. And the excuse was, well, they came out to our kids' graduation from college, and so we didn't need to make a trip to see them. But what it really was, I did not want to see um, the how my mother was changing,
Mm.
how her ability to move and her ability to think was diminishing as her dementia slowly progressed. And she was one of these people where it came on slowly and lasted a long time. But I knew that I had to. I knew that I had to stop and see them. And so on the drive back from stores to upstate New York, I did several things. I had a book on CD that a friend had loaned me about radical acceptance. Listened to that whole thing. I had long phone conversations with at least two Al-Anon friends. And I prepared myself to just accept, to try to just accept who she was as she was at that time, not who she had been earlier in my life, because that person was going away, you know?
Mm.
So we were going to go out to dinner at a restaurant near where they lived that they liked. They went to frequently. And I got there early and I went in and I talked to the hostess. I said, I'm meeting my parents here for dinner. And she probably said my name. I don't know. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're Woody and Marilyn's boy." Okay. I was what, 50 something, but yeah, I'm their boy. And they weren't there yet. So when they arrived, this restaurant was in an old house. It had steps going up from the parking area. They had to put up a ramp so my mother could make it up the steps with her walker. And then we had to go through this sort of crowded bar area to get to where we were going to sit and have dinner. And everybody in the bar just graciously got up, moved out of the way. And I saw not what I was seeing, that these people were not seeing what I was seeing. What I was seeing was my mother losing her ability to do things. And what they saw was somebody who needed some space to get to her dinner table.
Mm.
And I recognized that. And, those sorts of things, like seeing just briefly through somebody else's eyes, have made a big difference to me. And we had a really nice dinner. It was a really good visit. And it's because I prepared myself to accept what is and not what I wanted it to be. And, as it is with dementia, it doesn't get better.
Mm.
It's not like alcoholism. With alcoholism, you got some hope of recovery. With dementia, it doesn't get better. At
Mm-mm.
least not yet. I know there's some stuff on the horizon that might happen by the time I'm dead. But so as she continued to decline, and then as my father went into a fairly rapid decline, I really had to practice being with them as they were. And the behaviors of somebody with dementia, the the repetition, the forgetting, really also reminded me of the behaviors of an active alcoholic.
Mhm, mhm,
And I had to recognize that I was being activated by that, and that it was not the same thing, even though it kind of was the same thing. And again, using the things that I had learned to do, and knowing that somewhere inside, my mother and my father were still there, even though they weren't able to, by the end of their lives, they were not able to communicate very coherently. They were still there, you know. And to be able to pre-grieve their deaths and recognize that that is what was happening.
mhm.
And I want to just reference one of the Al-Anon literature, which is there's a book called Opening Our Hearts, Transforming Our Losses, which is all about loss and grief in different aspects, and how our program tools can help us. And just, right at the beginning, it says things like, there's no schedule on grief. Everybody's grief is their own. And don't expect your grief to look like somebody else, and don't expect it to go on a particular schedule. And I've had some conversations with people who lost a close family member recently, and yeah, I mean, that just we recognize that in ourselves and in each other. And it was important for me to, so one of the tools of, I'm sorry, at least interrupted sentences, that's how I talk.
Okay.
One of the tools of recovery, one of the principles of recovery, we talk about principles, and we recognize that the 12 steps are some of those principles. And one of those is inventory, taking a good, honest look at myself. And when my father died first, my mother died about 10 months later. And when he died, I didn't have like this sudden, deep, penetrating grief that, like, you're, quote, supposed to have,
Mm,
whatever that means.
mhm,
And what I realized upon reflection was that I had been grieving his loss for years. He was not suddenly taken from me. He was gradually taken from me over a period of 3 or 4 years. My mother was gradually taken from me over a period of at least a decade.
mm,
And recognizing that it was okay that I wasn't totally broken by their death, and in some ways relieved.
mhm, mhm,
By the time my father died, he was completely, what's the word? He was aphasic, so he couldn't form words. It started out he couldn't remember words, and eventually it got to the point where he just couldn't even form words. And we had no idea whether he was understanding anything because he generally didn't respond. The one thing that he still responded to was music from his youth.
mm. I
We
knew you were
could
going
put
to say
on,
that.
yeah, it's so typical, but we could
That
put on
I
Glenn
knew that's
Miller,
what you were going to
and
say. Yep.
he would he would bob his head and tap his feet, even though he had no words at that point.
Mhm,
And again, being able to just see those things and say, this is, there's still something of him in there,
mhm, mhm,
even though I can't see it.
mhm,
We have some slogans, and some people say the slogans are so trite. And good friend of mine says the slogans are like pocket change because I can just
Mm.
reach in and pull one out when I need it. I don't have to
I
open
love
a book or
them. I
anything,
love them. Yeah, I love that analogy. They're like pocket change. Love them.
and one of the slogans is first things first.
Hmm.
Do the first thing that you need to do. Don't put it off. When I got the call from my brother that my father was no longer drinking water, no longer eating, I thought, okay, I need to go. I need to be there. He was 400 and something miles away. So it's a day's drive, basically. And then it seemed like, okay, he's drinking a little bit. And at some point, they brought in hospice. I don't remember exactly when that happened because I wasn't there. So he was in a hospital bed in the living room of their house so that he could be, with people. And I thought, okay, it's not quite so desperate. I have something I need to finish up at work. I'll finish that up and I'll come on Thursday. Wednesday night he died.
Mm.
I still feel that, I still feel that. It was 2021, so 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. I
Mhm.
still feel that like I was not there. I was not there. I chose to put something in front of that. I chose not to do the first thing first.
Mm.
My brother held him at home until I was able to get there on Thursday so I could say goodbye. So when I got the call in December of 2021 that my mother was in the hospital and was going to come home on hospice, I dropped everything and went.
Mm.
And I got there the day she came home from the hospital, the day she said her last words, and she died the next evening.
Wow.
You know, when the hospice people came the next morning, they're like, "Oh wow, she's a lot further along than we thought," because she basically went to sleep that night and didn't wake up.
Mhm.
And then I think there's these things we say about people choosing when they die.
Mhm.
Both my parents died when nobody was in the room. They were at home with
Mhm.
family, with caregivers, and they both died when nobody was in the room. That feels like a decision.
Mhm. Mhm.
My mother, even though she was in a coma or whatever, didn't go until the last of her caregivers had come to essentially say goodbye. And the caregiver and my brother went in to, gave my mother some morphine in preparation to turn her because you got to, somebody is in a coma. You have to turn them so they don't get bed sores and stuff. And it hurts. So, gave her some morphine. They went away and they came back and she was gone.
Mhm.
It's just like, but, I got to be there. And here's the thing. Here's how I know. Here's how I know that, she was still in there up to the end because when we came home from the hospital, and my brother reported this to me because I was, of course, at the drugstore getting supplies, right?
Mhm.
I'm the guy who does errands. She was in the car and she had fallen asleep on the way home from the hospital, so he left her there. And when she woke up and was ready to get out, she looked up at the sky and she said, "Beautiful blue sky." And those were her last words.
Mhm.
I mean, she might have said no or something a couple times, but that doesn't count. And she was always somebody who was looking for beauty in the world.
Mhm.
When we, certainly when they would travel, she always had a sketchbook. I have actually right in front of me a banker's box full of her sketchbooks that one of these days I'm going to go through and like digitize the important ones.
Mhm.
But that was sort of her way of journaling.
Mhm.
She was always, she would sit my brother found something she had written. She also journaled in words, and she would just, I think, pick up whatever was near her and write in it. And she had written about, essentially watching the show of the turkeys out in the field outside their house. And again, this was one of these things that changed our perspective on what she was experiencing.
Mm.
Because, and my brother said he would see her just, quote, sitting there staring out the window and feel like maybe he should be doing something to entertain her, not realizing that she was entertaining herself,
Mhm.
watching what was going on outside the window.
Yeah.
Um, so in the last few years, well, I mean, they died in 2021, but in the certainly in the almost decade leading up to that, I really used the principles of my recovery program in the way that I was able to be with them and love them. And occasionally blow up because I'm human. Okay.
Yes.
And I am so grateful. It's crazy the things you get grateful for. I'm grateful that the pandemic introduced us to Zoom
Mm.
because when I was visiting, used to be when we would go visit my parents, we would always schedule at least one recovery meeting in our visit. There was a Friday noon meeting that I would regularly go to the point where they started to recognize me and say, "Oh, you're back."
Mm.
With the advent of Zoom, I could just go for a walk and put a meeting on. And there's a 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time meeting that was one of my go-tos because I would usually wake up with the sun and I get up and I could just go out for a walk and walk for a few miles while I was on the meeting, you know, and that helped me to be more accepting of what was happening inside the house.
Mm. Yeah. Well,
So
we're getting close to time here. Is
yeah,
there
yeah,
anything that you wanted to share that you haven't had an opportunity to share yet?
there is one other thing, and that's about finding gratitude.
Mm.
And this one also involves a death. I'm sorry, that's been something that's happened in my life recently.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's part of life.
yeah, a few years ago, our dog died. Well, our dog injured himself severely to the point where, as an older dog, it was clear that he would not tolerate surgery and recovery at all. He fell and fractured his shoulder into multiple pieces.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's a horrible thing. We knew we were losing him eventually, but to have it happen suddenly on a Sunday afternoon is I know it was a Saturday because there was a football game going on. Um, and the things that I found, at least some of the things that I found to be grateful for in that experience included we were home.
Mm.
You know, I was able to sit with him when he's lying on the floor in pain, not able to get up, um, and me not knowing exactly what to do. Um, our son, who lived in town, came over and was able to be there with us. We discovered there exists in our area a pet ambulance, which is, I think it's still around. It is totally funded by donations. They
Oh,
do
wow.
not charge. They just ask you to donate what you can. When they were able to take this 70-pound dog into their ambulance, take him to the pet hospital, the animal hospital, where we followed along behind, where the vet there very gently told us what the situation was and what our options were, and then gave us time.
Mm,
He said, take as much time as you need to decide, what you think is best for your pet, for your friend here. And we talked about it. I think we called our other son, and we decided that the most humane thing to do for him was to say goodbye. And so we got to be there and say goodbye as he breathed his last,
mm,
and so much to be grateful for
mm,
in that horrible situation.
mhm,
Um, you know, it, it changes, again, it changes the way I remember that day. It's
mm,
sad,
mhm,
but there was also
mhm,
gratitude and joy in it. And this program taught me to look for gratitude,
mm.
you know,
Yeah.
to say what was good about today when I'm in the middle of, oh, it was a horrible, no good, very bad day. What was good about today? Oh, because there's always something. There's
Yeah.
always something. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Well,
That's what
thank
I've
you
got.
so much. I do want to reflect on a couple things. I want to also mention I will put a link to the opening our hearts and transforming our losses in the show notes so that if people want to find it, they can.
Yeah. And if you could
Um,
make that link to the Al-Anon bookstore,
yeah,
that
I
would
will
be
for sure.
appreciated.
And the like you're talking about acceptance has been incredibly powerful. Absolutely for me too. I just didn't realize how unaccepting I was. I was basically trying to fight against reality. And then also gratitude. I was blessed to start a gratitude journal in July of 2000.
Mm,
So honestly, I had been doing it I didn't get in recovery until 2015. So I had lots of years of gratitude practice, and it really was a nice, very long runway to pave the way for me in recovery. And, like you said, it doesn't matter how bad things are, there's always something to be grateful for. And that leads me to another thing that you talked about is perspective shift. Like when you talked
mhm.
about the perspective of the people in the restaurant with
Yeah.
your mom, that was so powerful to hear that. And I think for me, a gigantic part of my recovery has been getting perspective shift after perspective shift after perspective shift. And when you mentioned
Mhm.
the principle of inventory, I think for me, of all the incredible gifts I got from recovery, the best and most important has been understanding my part in things, which came from doing an inventory. That I really had absolutely no idea what I was doing in my life to create and chaos and drama and to exacerbate the existing chaos and drama around me. And I think what I heard from you without you saying it is your recovery has allowed you to be present in your life and in your relationships in a way that you just weren't able to before. And I love that. I have a sponsee who we've worked together for many years now. And in her first couple of years, every time something would be difficult, she would say, at least I'm present, at least I'm present, at least I'm present. And I feel like it took me years to really absorb the importance of that. But to be able to be present in your own life and in your own relationships is such a gift.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can add one more thing.
Of course.
I heard early on from um, a member of a meeting, she would always say, the only things I can control are my actions and my attitudes.
Mhm.
And I always thought, how do you control your attitude? Like, isn't that like how you feel about something? And then I heard, I think it was an AA speaker, and he said his sponsor gave him a definition of attitude from aviation, which is angle of approach,
Mm.
which is perspective.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, I can change my angle of approach. I can change the way in which I look at situations, and
Mm.
that is changing my attitude. And then it made sense to me.
Yeah,
So if
I
you've heard
love
that and
that.
it didn't make sense to you, maybe it does now.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Spencer. And I will also put a link to your podcast in the show notes as well. Again, this is Spencer, and he's the host of the Recovery Show. And I'm so grateful for your experience, strength, and hope, Spencer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
If you've ever noticed yourself going quiet, backing down, or overriding your needs just to keep a relationship going, this workshop is for you. It's called Boundaries for Real Love: How to Stop Shrinking in Your Relationships. Shrinking doesn't happen all at once, it happens slowly. You stay connected, but you're not fully present. You're there, but not all the way there. This workshop isn't about becoming hard, guarded, or confrontational. It's about learning how to stay yourself in relationship, even when guilt, fear, or pushback show up. We'll meet live on Zoom Thursday, February 26th from 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern Time. A limited replay will be available. If shrinking isn't working anymore and you want closeness without self-abandonment, you can learn more and register at higherpowercc.com/real-love. You don't have to disappear to stay connected.